Vampire names such as Dracula and Alucard inevitably come to mind whenever you talk about the creatures of the night. They are the ultimate monsters for Blade to be the best there is, or maybe the blood-sucking anime vampires that can destroy entire cities and towns. While they may be the strongest ones in fiction, none of them are truly a god. These are but monsters that rule, ancient lords, or extremely skilled killers with a place of origin. There must be a first of them all, the one that started the lineage of all the other creatures that will feed on blood. And in some worlds, this creature is not just a ruler, it's divine. That's what we are talking about today. For a being to qualify as a vampire god on this list, they must have founded an entire species of vampires, become the god or ruler of vampires, and or a creature of the cosmic, and must have originated from ancient myth as the first bat or blood creature that inspired what we call a vampire today. It's a countdown of creatures with powers that outmatch those of the most powerful vampires. They are behind the creation, patrons, rulers, and the divine gods whose dark powers influenced games, mythology, and literature. From the first criminal to spill blood and create vampires with it in his realm, to demonic bat gods and ancient goddesses, whose legends are thousands of years older than the word vampire. Here are 8 horrifying vampire gods that fans don't even know. Akasha, the Queen of the Damned, worshipped as a goddess. Every vampire has a maker, a greater immortal further up the evolutionary chain, who passed on the dark gift. In the Vampire Chronicles, the chain of ascension eventually leads back to just one woman, the ancestor of Lestat, Lewis, and all vampires preceding them in the Anne Rice series. Akasha was the first, the mother of all vampires, and a queen whom people loved, adored, and even worshipped. The Vampire Chronicles series begins around 6,000 years before the story of Lestat takes place, when Akasha ruled ancient Egypt with King Enkil. While turning into a vampire by way of a bite or a spell is most common, the process was somewhat different for Akasha. When the pair were seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, the supernatural spirit known as Amel entered Akasha to save her. Instead of mending the ailing queen, the spirit merged with her, turning her into the very first human vampire in existence. Both Akasha and Enkil would eventually pass the dark gift to new vampires, slowly birthing a hidden race. As subsequent generations of vampires weakened, her blood was seen as the pure, powerful source of the species. Simply put, all vampires exist through her transformation. She is the progenitor, not the oldest vampire, but the species as a whole. Her immortality was a far more elevated experience than that of a mere queen, an existence from which human beings bowed down before her, worshipped her as though she were a god, building her temples and performing rites in honor of her godlike beauty, immense power, and evidently everlasting life. As far as humans were concerned, she was so much more than mortal, untouchable, and seemingly immortal. In the Queen of the Damned, centuries later, the human being worshipped as a deity began to rise above mere mortals yet again. In the many hundreds of years that she slept beside King Enkil, she had drifted further from the material plane, and upon waking, found herself on a modern Earth she viewed as having strayed from its course. Instead of allowing her species to live a clandestine existence in the shadows, she was determined to set them up to dominate, placing them at the top of the food chain with humans enslaved. This terror, however, was far from a simple power fantasy. She was physically capable of fulfilling her horrific design. As the first of her kind, she was both loved and respected, and to a degree, feared by the many vampires she outranked, all the other species' ancestors coming from her very blood. Her eternal being had given her not just a position as Queen of the Damned, but the ability to see that rank fully established as progenitor of her species. Jedidoma, the lord of vampires who wants to reset reality. Vampire lords want to dominate, in other words, expand their lands, increase the size of their armies, or obtain an unending source of power. But that doesn't interest the primary antagonist of Darkstalkers. That name is Jedidoma, who is called Vampire Savior in Japan. He isn't interested in ruling the world. He wants to obliterate it and bring something new. He believes he can then create something far better from the rubble. Jeddah, Lord of Vampires as he calls himself, is one of Mackay's most important residents. Mackay is the demonic world where monsters, supernatural creatures, and other such beasts reside. Unfortunately for those in Mackay, Jeddah eventually gets a little sick of how violent and self-serving everyone in it is. They make their home more and more corrupt with their selfish deeds and violence, so he finally decides there isn't a point in continuing what they're doing, and that maybe a fresh start will be just what everyone needs. Jeddah begins plotting ways to obliterate Mackay and start over from the ground up, and he plans to begin with his perfect creation. His plan leads him to one of the most disturbingly evil plans that a vampire has ever had. Jeddah seeks to bring forth the ancient fetus of God, some kind of god that has the ability to reshape reality. To wake this cosmic being up, Jeddah must go through with a massive sacrifice. He begins amassing human souls and any living creature that gets in his way, one after the next. To Jeddah, every person is nothing more than a component of his world, spanning construction, another brick in the edifice of the perfect world he is trying to bring about. All humans are easily expendable for the sake of his vision. Jeddah exhibits divine traits in his powers, not merely sipping blood to stay alive, but to command it as weapons, ranging from razor-sharp swords and giant scythes to the writhing tendrils he uses to rip apart enemies. He can shape and bend his body in any form imaginable, taking blows that would easily kill others with ease. Any injury sustained by Jeddah will be healed quickly. He will remind the player not to be facing a demon or a vampire, but a cosmic deity of creation itself, which is precisely how he perceives himself. While other vampires in literature often concern themselves with hunger or revenge, or just the accumulation of power for the sake of such, Jeddah seems to view himself as an honest-to-God arbiter of life and death, playing God. Unlike most of the more prominent vampire characters that exist, Jeddah doesn't just play the part of vampire king, he is an aspiring cosmic creator that they could only dream of becoming. And the universe exists for him to mold to his blood in his divine will. Marcus Corvinus, the progenitor of an entire vampire species. While not many vampire legends suggest an origin story that starts with a particular person, rather, they blame it all on magic, ancient rites, and curses. Underworld takes a rather simpler route. The existence of vampires began with a man called Marcus Corvinus, the first true vampire of them all, the progenitor of all bloodsuckers of the Underworld franchise. Born with the unusual Corvinus strain, Marcus, just like his immortal father, Alexander Corvinus, was immortal. It all got serious when Marcus, who as such was never prone to being converted, got a bite from an infected bat. Instead of dying, the Corvinus strain in him combined with the virus, and it created the first vampire in history. That's why every vampire in the Underworld series is directly related to Marcus. Having Marcus at the beginning makes him more than just the oldest member of his species. He is also the progenitor of them all. It is due to him that the Death Dealers exist, due to him that the Elders come from the bloodline that comes from him, due to him that vampires exist at all. So, if in other series vampires were rulers, then in the Underworld, Marcus Corvinus is a living origin story of the whole kind. Moreover, being one of the three sons of Alexander Corvinus, the events initiated by his decisions, along with his family, set in motion the entire war between the Lycans and the vampires in Underworld, which, after Marcus himself gets put to sleep by the Elders for centuries, returns to finish him off as one of the most formidable villains in the series, just to make him the original vampire and still above pretty much every one of his offspring. And that's why he deserved a place on this list, not a god to be revered, but a progenitor for vampires as significant as a deity. Cain, the cursed first vampire and dark god of the kindred. Every vampire has a creation story. Some are products of wicked sorcery. Others came from virus mutations or from the outcome of a ritual. In the world of darkness, there's one name, and one alone, who is believed to have created all vampires: Cain. Not some night-stalking ghoul. Cain was the son of the first mother and father, who shed the blood of his brother, the firstborn, and was, through God's curse, punished with eternal existence and the thirst for blood in his being, the very first vampire. As this new life unfolded, he soon realized the burden and curse of his existence, and begat more bloodsuckers, and eventually the many kindred clans of Vampire the Masquerade were born. And to this day, their bloodlines still trace back to him. Cain is not just the first vampire. he is also the progenitor of the entire vampire society. He not only passed down blood, but he is credited with passing down disciplines or supernatural powers such as mind control, flight, and so on, as well as powers so immense that the oldest and most respected vampires of the present day are mere faint shadows of him. Not everyone sees him in the same way. Some believe Cain to be immortal and his return to be a sign of the end of all kindred, the Gehenna. It has led to cults in the world of darkness, worshipping Cain as a legendary patriarch. And this is what makes Cain different from most vampire creators. It's not how powerful or old he is a template of a creature, a prototype by which all vampires are judged. Without Bram Stoker's Dracula, vampires would still exist. Without the cursed Cain, the kindred of vampire, the masquerade, would never have come into existence. The first vampire god, the bloodline, creator of all kindred. Camazotz, the Maya bat god, who feels like the first vampire. For most of us, vampires mean spooky castles, Transylvanian nobles, and blood-sucking beasts of the night. But even before Bram Stoker conjured up his now famous Count, a terrifying bat god ruled the ancient Maya, and his legend reads an awful lot like that of the vampire. Meet Camazotz, arguably the most ancient proto-vampiric character in mythology. What do we know about Camazotz? In Maya lore, Camazotz is a bloodthirsty bat god associated with the night, caves, darkness, sacrifice, and death. His name is usually translated as Death Bat. He rules those areas of darkness that the light seldom penetrates, transforming caves and the underworld into realms of pure fear. Where the typical Dracula tale is that of a cursed human or an ancient nobleman, the Mayans' depiction of Camazotz is much more primordial and real. He is simply a powerful supernatural predator linked to the darkness of the world that most feared him. Most famous depiction of Camazotz in Mayan mythology. You may recognize Camazotz if you're at all familiar with Mayan mythology. His most iconic role comes in the sacred Quiche Mayan text called the Popol Vuh. During the mythological journey of the hero twins into the Mayan underworld, the brothers enter the House of Bats, a terrifying lair where the great bat god himself and his monstrous brethren hide in the gloom. In one of the most notorious scenes in the Popol Vuh, Camazotz decapitates one of the heroes, thereby further cementing his divine place as an agent of sacrifice and death. Camazotz is no Dracula, yet he feels like one. Okay, let's be very clear. No one in the actual mythology refers to Camazotz as a vampire. That whole notion wouldn't pop up in European culture for thousands of years more. However, if you take into account how easy it is to draw connections between Camazotz and the classic vampire figure in pop culture, it should not come as much of a surprise. His ancient associations with darkness, caves, winged forms, and human blood and sacrifice make him quite a natural predecessor to the vampire archetype. Even before Count Dracula made his debut on the scene centuries later, Camazotz was already serving as an archetype of the winged hunter of the night. He may not have technically been a vampire, but Camazotz came about as close to being a vampire god as ancient mythology ever got. Lamashtu, the Mesopotamian blood-drinking demon goddess. Way before Bram Stoker put fangs in his monster, way before vampires slunk around the Gothic pages of novels or flitted about in medieval tales of demonic lore, ancient Mesopotamia had its own fearsome creature of the night, Lamashtu. She was a demonic goddess, in other words, a goddess, a demon, or both, who existed far before our familiar notions of demonology. She wasn't just a figure in a monster story for ancient Mesopotamians, but a genuine threat that they believed could prowl through the darkness into their homes. Unlike other demons, who generally operated on behalf of gods, Lamashtu was feared simply because she acted on her own initiative. According to the ancient texts, she was a spreader of sickness and death and could cause terrible nightmares, particularly to mothers and children. People protected themselves with amulets and incantations, fearing the wanderings of a malicious supernatural being who prowled the night for vulnerable targets. What's really interesting about Lamashtu, however, is how many traits of this Mesopotamian monster overlap with vampire mythology that wouldn't appear until thousands of years later. Some ancient writings describe her drinking the blood of her victims, rather than killing them directly. Her hunger for life force and the suffering that followed in her wake make her eerily similar to the predatory fears that later developed into vampire lore. Lamashtu would, of course, never have been called a vampire in her day. The term had not yet been invented, but the parallels are so striking. The love of blood, of spreading disease, the connection to the night, and the death that followed, that they led some modern writers to see her as perhaps the most concrete proto-vampire in mythology. She's one of the oldest fears about blood-drinking creatures of the dark, personified in a single figure, proving that the dread of night-stalking parasites existed long before the stories became mainstream. That's why she makes this list. A proto-vampire goddess like Lilitu, Mesopotamian night drinker. And before you start assigning every ancestor of ours whose nightmares involved anything dark and spooky and full of supernatural evil to blood-sucking lords of the gloom, remember that the oldest ones may date as far back as ancient Mesopotamia, when there were terrifying legends about the monsters that haunted the night, long before the word vampire even existed. One such awesome creature is one of our first true demons of the night, the enticing Lilitu spirits, a name destined to appear in stories forever after, and also later connected to the famous Lilith. According to those ancient Mesopotamian texts, Lilitu was indeed a dangerous spirit that haunted the dark. She is also linked with the night, the outside world, the storm, and sickness. Unlike other beasts that would assault you openly and obviously in the light, however, the legends say that Lilitu moved around unseen, that she would sneak into houses when men were asleep, that she was particularly a danger for vulnerable men and for pregnant women and newborn babies. In other words, she was the bogeyman in ancient times. People of that era didn't consider it a fun little tale. That was their reason why they were so vulnerable in the dark. And Lilitu would, of course, get picked up in various myths across cultures and get merged with other supernatural entities over the centuries. Her myths would get intertwined with Lilith over time and come to form this image of a seductive woman who would stalk the night and consume their life. Regardless of what time period or the exact legends, at heart, she remained the same type of monster. She fed upon the life and vitality of the living and left fear in their wake. This led many modern writers of horror tales to classify her as one of mythology's first female vampires. Naturally, these early texts do not speak of her as having traits of the modern-day vampire, and most of the features known about her were developed during her time spent within Jewish and medieval lore, but that just means she's a good, complicated myth. She is this figure existing between old religion, folklore, and modern horror stories, showing how stories morph and take on new forms as they're told through the generations. And so Lilith has to earn her spot on the list. She's neither solely a demon nor simple goddess. She exists in this liminal space between. She is the prehistoric female spirit of the night who is often compared to our female vampire archetype before Dracula, Gothic lit, or even the folklore tales about medieval vampires were in the world's imagination. Modern vampire gods. How the undead became a living myth. After spending so long examining mythical deities, monster narratives, and fantasy worlds, you might assume that the vampire god concept is a lost art, but curiously it's not. You won't find any vampire gods in traditional religion today. That idea has, if nothing else, moved on. But that doesn't mean that it hasn't found new life. Indeed, over the last several decades, modern occult, gothic, and vampire communities have begun developing a mythology around the vampiric idea. Instead of being a creature to be feared in many subcultures, the vampire has been redefined as an ancient being of immortal potential, transformative power, hidden wisdom, and the inherent dual nature of life and death. In this context, original spirits, beings, and even some deities become guardians of the night, of blood, and of predators, not as the result of an ancient mythology, but as the result of attributes inherent to what these subcultures believe about the vampire. A vampire god is not part of a system such as was dealt with in the video series, for they are not at all united in one central doctrine. There is no sacred text, no agreed pantheon, and no structure. They exist as new forms of modern mythology, blending occult, literary, and personal spirituality with existing folklore and mythologies. So, a group might invoke deities with links to the night, while another might forge a new pantheon based on gothic fiction, role-playing games, or modern vampires. This actually echoes the evolution of the vampire. The vampire hasn't ever really been one particular thing. Medieval Europe and Africa made sense of the vampire in their own way. Stoker remade him into an aristocratic menace, modern authors into anti-hero figures, and so on. The modern communities following the vampire god concept do no different. The vampire is remade as a symbolic or spiritual figure rather than a literal blood-drinking menace. What these modern vampire gods represent, whether symbolically, philosophically, or spiritually, is a matter of personal choice. Still, it's certainly interesting that we humans continue to craft new myths around the vampire concept thousands of years after its first introduction. Instead of getting trapped in a forgotten religion or in fictional worlds, the vampire has instead evolved along with humanity itself. Even after reading this collection of lists on many of the most well-known vampire deities, the one thing we can take away is that the vampire god never truly went anywhere. They have existed as Cain's corrupted progeny and Akasha's path toward divinity. They've existed as Lamashtu, the nightmare god, and Camazotz, the dark king. New legends are still being born today, all concerning the idea of blood and the god of immortality and vampirism as a potent archetype. Ultimately, one could argue there's only one common thing tying these disparate vampire stories together. The vampires manifest themselves when theology and religion spill over into the supernatural horror realm. While a couple, Cain or Akasha for example, actually did become the parent vampire for all vampires in the story they belong to, their spiritual ancestor, if you will. Many do not bear the title of God, but they possess such authority over the issues of life and death of not only the vampires that look up to them, but also the vampires themselves, that they may as well be God. Others, like Camazotz, Lamashtu, or Lilitu, predate Dracula by millennia. They weren't technically vampires, per se, but the mythology surrounding them with respect to blood, death, and the occult served as the foundations of the fears that would eventually develop into the very notion of vampirism. Regardless of whether they are a damned progenitor creating an entire bloodline with a sin, a blood queen considered a living deity, or a blood-drinking bat god worshipped centuries before Dracula would make his debut in fiction, these characters are a reminder that the undead have long been beholden to something even more ancient and frightening than themselves. So, which of these vampire gods would you like to see adapted into a movie, anime, or video game? Would you be interested in an even deeper dive into the world's real-world mythologies, and specifically a video exploring the ancient blood gods whose myths often sound eerily familiar? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and hit the like button. I'll see you in our next video.